Hi there, my name's Ian Wright, and I'd just like to do a little quick podcast because tomorrow is World Children's Day. Actually, there's lots of World Children's Days. The 1st of June is one where a lot of countries celebrate children on that day. The 20th of November is another one, but there are many different countries have World Children's Days on different days. But I just wanted to talk about children for a bit and celebrate them just for a second and talk about one or two things. I suppose that when we're talking about children on a global scale, we're talking about child labour, child slavery, child soldiers, and child protection. And we're also talking really about freedom, the freedom of a child to maximise their potential. And I just want to talk about what I do and what we do as osteopaths, and in that small way, in that we hopefully help children to find as much freedom as possible. So I just want to explain that just a little bit. I run a clinic called the Daisy Clinic in Ireland, and it's a charity-based clinic that treats children with special needs in the community. And we treat children from tiny babies to late teens with all sorts of difficulties, from cerebral palsy to rare genetic conditions to autism, autistic spectrum disorder, etc. And what we're looking at really when we're working is to allow them to gain as much freedom within themselves as is possible, be it physically or emotionally. In these complex genetic or cerebral palsy conditions, we can't change them. We have no cure for them. But there are many, many ways in which we can support them, help release their potential and maximize their abilities to be in the world, really. And it reminds me of a time one of my colleagues, who was an associate of mine at the time, came to the Daisy Clinic and visiting, and he said, "Ian, these children have so much going on. How can we help them at all?" And a couple of feet away was the mother of a cerebral palsy little girl who has been coming to me for many years, actually. And I said, let's ask someone else to answer this. So I said, "Look, Clodagh, will you tell this fella what you think osteopathy does and has done for your daughter?" Anyway, she spent the next half an hour talking through so many different ways it's helped. It was a wonderful experience to listen to this. I didn't have to say a word, and in the end he was like, "Okay, I get it." So, what do? When we're working with children, we're using very gentle, very fluid, very quiet techniques to free blocks in the body, be it in the structure or in the fluid fields, and to allow everything to be as free as possible. That's really what we do. And it's very precise and it's very detailed, and it takes quite a lot of skill and a lot of years of learning to work with these very subtle, very small, particular areas to free them up and maximize their function. So, let's talk about the basics of what we do. For example, a baby, a child, a fetus, pre-birth, is in a perfect fluid environment and is growing perfectly happy. But there are situations, prematurity, for example, or if mother's had some sort of virus or some sort of illness or change in a metabolic state like diabetes or something, that can have an effect on this perfect fluid environment that the baby's growing in. Or in the latter stages of pregnancy, they can get stuck and lodge between the pelvis when there's just not quite enough space for them, and they can get. And so what happens is their heads and their bodies are growing, but they're growing against a lack of space, and things can get a bit squashed and compressed. And then in the birth itself, it's a huge force through the baby's head and other parts of the body, and twists and compressions and rotations. The plates actually ride over, the plates of the skull actually ride over each other in the birth process. And the wonderful thing about babies is they have this incredible ability to re-establish normal, as in they free themselves up. Now, where we come in is when things still haven't quite released, and certain compressions remain, and some can affect other parts of the body. For example, certain compressions between the head and the neck can have some effect on the nerve supplies, which could affect the gut, etc., and could be relevant in things like colic reflux, etc. There's a lot of complex things going on. But again, it comes down to freeing. So as this perfect baby child is growing and is developing its posture and comes into illnesses, accidents, even operations, all of these stories almost affect this perfect normal functioning of the baby. And our job is to try in the child to re-establish as much as we can normal. So I think one of the most important things about what we do is preventative. It prevents problems later. For example, if you can get the mechanics of the head and the neck to sit correctly structurally, as the baby grows to sit, to stand, to walk, their posture develops. And if there are imbalances, for example, between the head and the neck, it can affect the postural development. So what we're doing is we're looking at potential areas that could cause trouble and freeing those up as much as we can to allow free and full function, which will hopefully maximize the potential in a normal child with absolutely normal delivery and normal stories. There are always small little things we can do, to a child that has a great deal of struggle and has great problems, where there's a lot of work we can do to try and help them just that little bit. And the amazing thing is, when you're treating a child, say with cerebral palsy or complex genetic disorders, a tiny bit of freedom that can help with a little bit stronger, a little bit freer in some of the stiffness, just that tiny bit can have a huge effect on their quality of lives. And so for me, it's very, very important. So in some ways, what we're trying to do is free up the child. And this also comes into when you're looking at children who have, say, emotional trauma, say, for example, orphans. I've treated many Romanian orphans, especially from the time when they were really treated in a very difficult way, and they come with a whole plethora of problems, anxiety, fear, patterns. Actually, the research shows in some of these Romanian orphans, the amygdala, the part of the brain that gives a kind of pre-conscious fear response, that part of the brain is actually enlarged, and the prefrontal cortex that kind of acts almost as a brake to calm that down doesn't work, and is underdeveloped. So the parts of the brain actually develop slightly differently in children who've had trauma and difficulty and are unheld. And we can try and treat and calm down a little bit this sense of heightened state anxiety in the nervous system in children. And actually, children hold emotional trauma in a much more physical way, and the more physical it is in their tissues, the more we can try and access and just wind things down and rebalance and calm them. So really, in an ideal, perfect world, we would want all children to be treated or to be checked, because we're freeing up and we're maximizing their potential. And really, creating as much freedom for them within their bodies and their structures as is possible. Anyway, so happy World Children's Day to everybody. And let's celebrate children.